Sex and survival, the two things that bring together all species. If you want to be successful from an evolutionary perspective at least, you need to survive the trials and tribulations of life, at least long enough to find a mate, reproduce, and pass your genes on to the next generation. Otherwise, not only do you die, but so does your genetic legacy. Humans and animals alike go to all kinds of extraordinary lengths for the sake of sex. And the way that we conceptualize the similarities and differences between human and non-human sexual behavior, particularly in the context of aggression and choice, can impact the rhetoric that we use when discussing human sexual behavior and, in particular, sexual misconduct. How many of you like dolphins? Raise your hands. Yeah, I kind of hate to be the one to tell you this, but dolphins are known to be extraordinarily sexually aggressive, forcing sex not only onto other dolphins, but also onto humans. This behavior is well documented, but in most sources there is a hesitancy to classify this aggression as rape or sexual assault in the way that we would typically do for humans. In an article by Washington City Paper, an author explained that this trepidation stems from the perspective that dolphins, and all non-human species, are incapable of rape because to do so would necessitate an understanding of consent. This perspective argues that despite the aggression of these forced copulations, like those documented in dolphins, animals are simply following a natural program that evolution has dictated. Do what you have to do in order to pass on your genes. But if that were the case, why is it that not all sexual strategies involve such aggression? How come all animals don't mate through forced copulation? The fact that there exist alternatives to this approach of aggression identifies the idea that acts of aggression are the result of a natural program as shaky at best. Let's consider another species, the bowerbird. This species is famous for its mating rituals. If you know nothing of sexual selection, there's still a relatively good chance that you've heard of the bowerbird. In order to woo females, the male will build altars out of twigs and sticks and decorate these structures with all kinds of treasures, from berries to flowers to dung to trash or whatever it can find. But the really cool thing is that males decorate according to their own taste. Bowerbird A might be particularly enamored with the color blue, and so in order to decorate his altar, he'll hunt out berries and flowers and whatever else in that hue. Bowerbird B, however, might love the color red, and he will decorate accordingly as well. But the really, really cool thing is that the female, when it comes time to find a mate, will fly between these altars and however many more, and pick the one that is most similar to her own taste. These birds bond and mate through a shared aesthetic taste. But the other interesting thing about the bowerbird is the way that it stands in stark contrast to the dolphin. The dolphin's sexual behavior is explained through aggression, and the bowerbird's is through courtship and subsequent choice. And this draws the whole idea of consent in the animal kingdom into question. The bowerbirds mate through choice. If the female likes blue, then she'll pick that male over the male who is decorated with red. If that male who decorated with red were then to force a sexual encounter on her, it would be in direct disrespect of that choice. If rape is defined as intercourse or penetration carried out against an individual without that individual's consent, and if the bowerbird is in fact capable of choice like it seems to be, that equation adds up to argue that non-human species may be capable of consent, and therefore of disrespecting it. The world of sexual selection is one of huge variety. For every spider biting the head off its mate, there is a species like the prairie vole, which spends more than 50% of their time with a monogamous mate. And this variation extends into all facets of animal behavior, and alternatives to aggression go beyond simply not being aggressive to acts of altruism. There are all kinds of altruistic animal behaviors that call into question whether evolution really dictates aggression as the go-to tactic at all. Altruism is defined as an action or behavior in which an animal makes the sacrifice of its own well-being for the benefit of another animal. For example, there are vampire bats which share their harvest of blood. If one is hungry and has had an unsuccessful hunt, his neighbors will regurgitate blood out of their own stomachs in order to feed the hungry bat. In yet another example, upon finding a moose carcass or other feast, ravens have been known to use a special set of calls to alert fellow ravens to come and share their hunt. Further, in 2013, a group of sperm whales took in a solo bottlenose dolphin with a spinal deformity, bringing it under their care. There are a myriad of examples of altruism, which question whether all animal behavior is actually centered around a drive to do the best for oneself at any expense to others. It is true that in many cases, the altruistic behavior can be categorized as ultimately leading back to some benefit to the animal engaging in the altruism, typically either in the form of kin selection or reciprocity. Kin selection is the idea that animals will help those that they share genes with, such as a brother or a sister, as that will improve the chances of those shared genes being passed on, which is still a genetic win for that animal. Reciprocity is the I scratch your back, you scratch my back approach, like the vampire bats feeding one another. I'm hungry today, you're hungry tomorrow. But there are cases of altruism that fall outside either of these categories, like that of a pack of whales effectively adopting the dolphin with the spinal deformation. Animal behavior is hugely varied, and sexual selection is just one example of this variation. At the forefront, the goal of all sexual strategy is the same. Get a mate, have sex, pass on your genes, and ensure your legacy in the generation to come. However, the strategy with which that goal is accomplished varies drastically from species to species. And in that variety, we see that despite motives of self-interest, aggression, and what we would anthropomorphize as selfishness, that isn't necessarily the only way. There are dolphins, aggressive and forceful, yes, but there are also bowerbirds. So how do humans fit into this picture? Humans are regularly considered to be of a higher mental order than other species, with more cognitive complexity and a higher capacity for conscious thought and decision-making. We have entire social systems built around a shared set of ethics and the enforcement of morality. Legal systems, religious systems, and community structures are all examples of how these ethics and morals are built and enforced. And in the vast majority of these systems, we claim to hold ourselves up as more capable of good, or at least more capable of understanding goodness than other species. And consistently, we argue an understanding of consent as well, which you will remember is the gray area that kept us from classifying aggression in dolphins as rape. If we have a higher cognitive ability and are actually more capable of understanding ethics, then it would follow that our sexual behavior would reflect this. However, humans engage in sexual misconduct far too regularly. In Canada alone, there are 460,000 cases of sexual assault every year, and 1 in 3 women will experience some form of sexual violence in their lifetime. And the culture around sexual assault, particularly in North America, often results in these cases of misconduct being dismissed. So often, in fact, that of every 1,000 cases of sexual assault in Canada, 997 assailants walk free. And it is the rhetoric that is used to dismiss these actions that I hope is called into question here today, as we question whether in fact aggression is as inherently natural as it is often portrayed. I'm sure that we have all heard the rhetorical devices comparing cases of sexual misconduct to animal behavior. Recently, we have seen the sexual assault accusation made by Christine Blasey Ford against Brett Kavanaugh described as horseplay. Even further, Megan Garber, writer for The Atlantic, wrote, "The cruelties she describes, the alleged acts of dehumanization that left her traumatized, she says, as a 15-year-old, and still as an adult, might be terrible yet, but they are also simply part of the natural order of things, boys becoming men." And of course, this is just one example of the rhetoric that circulates around most cases of sexual misconduct. It's the same rhetoric and attitude that makes schools dictate that girls as young as 12 cover their shoulders because boys cannot help themselves. In 2014, 24 middle school students in Georgia were suspended after publicly opposing a dress code banning yoga pants and leggings that was based on teachers' comments that such clothing was too distracting for boys. In Ottawa, a 14-year-old girl named Tally made national headlines for wearing a tank top that showed her bra strap, in defiance of a dress code she described as sexist and unfairly targeting female students. In a small community in central Alberta, the following note was posted in the hallways of a high school. "When you wear little to no clothing and dress provocatively because it's too hot out or because you think it's attractive, you're putting boys at risk of having a distracting working environment and saying your clothing is more important than their education. Instead of dressing like a thought, value the male education and dress conservatively." One middle schooler put it best: "The school is making boys out to be uncontrollable, horny monsters." This discourse is unfair to girls, yes, but it is also unfair to boys. It claims that 1, boys cannot control their actions, and 2, their default is aggression, like that of the dolphin. It's the same attitude that tells girls it isn't a problem to have someone blatantly crossing any boundaries they set. And it's the same rhetoric that creates a culture in which the value of women is dependent on their ability and willingness to provide sex, as is dictated by the rhetoric of a natural program. And yet, if we look to nature and all of its various manifestations, we don't see sexual behavior based inherently in aggression. We do see the dolphins and the cannibalism of spiders, of course, but we also see the bowerbirds. And while there is much research to be done into the sexual behavior of humans, and even more so into the evolution of said behavior, if we look to the examples set by other species, we see that sex isn't always based in aggression. And as long as we have questions remaining around human sexual behavior, the rhetoric of aggression as natural, as seen in the use of horseplay and natural order to dismiss Brett Kavanaugh's actions, or in the kind of value judgments that are imposed on girls based on their relationship to male sexuality as early as middle school, has an impact too damaging to be ignored. In discourse around sexual misconduct, and more generally around sexual behavior as a whole, in the rhetoric that is used to understand sexual behavior in humans and beyond, look to the variety of species and all of their strange and wonderful and weird behaviors that are employed in the pursuit of sexual success. The world of sex is wild, and many unusual things are natural. But the variety of sexual behavior across the animal kingdom should make us critical of the assumptions we make around human behavior, and critical of our own actions as well. Thank you.